the post-colonial theory, as you rightly say, has been developed mostly by people from the South, and especially India, who have migrated to other countries. And I think their very situation of being uprooted from their original place to a new culture, new civilization, has naturally brought to them, a whole reflection on the colonial history, because they migrated to the colonizing lands. Who are they? The question of self-identity. In that sense, they were forced to make a whole review of the colonial past, different from how the colonizers saw the colonial, because during the colonial period there was no voice for the people what they thought about this whole system. But after once slowly the oppressed people, marginalized people came up, they began to think by themselves. In that sense, the Indians who are doing post-colonial theory are rethinking, colonialism and its past interpretation, and how it saw history, people, culture, etc. So in the sense, what they probably started with India and Indian experience get a little more wider and applicable to all of South. In a situation of migrant and refugees, post-colonial theology is very important because it helps the people to understand. Of course, Germany had very few colonies, and a very short time too, so it did not have the same kind of experience as what's happening in England or in France. Nevertheless, since in Germany there are a lot of migrants and refugees coming, they should know the colonial history and its understanding. Then I think, in spite of all the things, a little bit chaos all happening, they will be able to understand and sympathize. There is a violence taking place, you can't approve. But you can't also say that one fellow, a refugee or migrant is doing something, immediately get panic. That's not also real. But you must know the world, there is so much of confusion. So we should allow a little bit of, confusion to happen. And we should not isolate and think that we are safe, we don't want you. As I said, the case of the Indian woman holding the placard, we are here because you are there. It may not be applied exactly to Germany, but for Europe, yes. So I think the question yesterday somebody raised also about, there are people who coming as migrants or who are able to come, etc. These are all subtle ideological kind of thing, to put them off. And I think my personal conviction, I'm going to write about it, is a thorough critique of nationalism is needed today. The human beings are above nations. The nation state came after the Westphalian, 1648, after the religious wars, something common. So it was a temporary solution so that religious wars don't happen. But we cannot and should not absolutize the nation states. And the human beings are the most important. Therefore, we have also Vatican II, Gaudium et Spes. The resources of the earth belongs to all God's children, So this attitude, therefore, I think Christian theology should help to relativize the exaggerated, dangerous ideology. Here in Germany, you have the National Socialism, and I think Germans are very careful because they know from experience what happened. This should be widely, as a background to be able to understand today's question of migrants and refugees. I would say that in India we don't depend on these post-colonial theories done in America or UK, because you see, it's happening in India, very close to reality, that all the struggles and demonstrations and everything is against the establishment of power, against authoritarianism. It's happening. We don't require this theory to tell, So we are happy that it's theorized in Europe and, made widely known. But it's not a case of that theory tells us to, it's happening at the ground, But we are only concerned that this post-colonial theory should feed on the material realities and not become simply a theory, spoken in the academic faculties, Therefore, there's a close collaboration is possible. So as I said, the material basis of postcolonial theory is strengthened. Then what's happening in India? There can be meeting together, mutual strengthening, is possible. And as you know that the subaltern studies, which is a very good effort to say that, I mean, this whole thing started because some people claimed that Indian national independence from colonial power came because of Gandhi, because of Nehru. This is like writing the story of the people, like story of emperors or the Pope. The story of the Pope is not the story of the church. The story of the rulers is not the story of the people, So they said, well, there were peasants who struggled, the workers who struggled, all this brought down the colonial power, So that way the faceless poor, recently I have written in Concilium an article, the faceless poor make a saint, about Mother Teresa, the faceless poor, they struggled, and the consequence of all that was the colonial power. Without bloodshed, the English people had to leave. And thanks to also the whole non-violent, ideology of Gandhi. Yeah. When we speak about prophets, we think of Jeremiah, all those big prophets, who confronted, Nathan, who confronted David, So there's a whole aspect of check of the uncontrolled power, which is dangerous, So we have the whole prophetic tradition of challenging powers. So legitimately the question can be whether postcolonial limits only to critique of the establishment. What about the culture? Culture also has got bad elements, all cultures. But in the past it was more also in the mission theology. Well, you have very good elements, let us take it, all belongs to Christ, spolia Egypti, But the bad elements you must correct. It looked very logical. But the whole point is the borderline between good and evil is so diffuse that nobody can, even Jesus says that allow it to grow. You cannot distinguish between what is good and, the fruits will show you. I think it is a haughtiness if somebody puts, himself or herself. So without the cooperation, subjectivity of the people, there's no change. The people ultimately who should realize that this is wrong, this cannot be done, this is something. So we should look for ways, instead of saying that, somebody says that, I want to play the prophetic. It's exactly what happened, the caste problem, in India. The missionaries came, and said caste is wrong, especially the Protestant missionaries, because they came from the Enlightenment tradition, equality, caste is wrong. Well, they listened and said, but how come in your churches there is a caste? So the missionaries were throwing stone from glass house. So there was a failure of a self-critique. The same thing is also working. So you are preaching the gospel, all equal, but then how come that there is a caste inside the church, So not to be judgmental. The thing should change, no doubt. But this is, I think, as a German and European, especially Germany, I think it will be very helpful what Jürgen Habermas speaks about, this discourse ethics. That means a conversation. Let us talk about it, Then the rationality is also horizontal, which is very different from the Kantian rationality from above, vertical, So that way, I think the Habermas has created, at least for the European discourse, a good foundation of a horizontal way of conversation, discourse ethics, and the critique of culture should become object of a discourse, conversation, than, a moral normativity you apply and then say,